And I grew up quite working class. You know, it was just this eerie moment where he's howling, "I have a right as an American."
In her reaction to the verdict, Heard repeats the same narrative that her legal team came up with for the trial, and she still denies accountability. I'll analyze her reaction to the verdict and show the best clips to illustrate my points. If you like the video, press the like button. Subscribe to the channel for more videos about the language of criminals and media personalities. Welcome. Heard writes that the disappointment she feels is beyond words. However, this doesn't stop her from describing it with words. Starting with the noun disappointment makes this word the syntactic focus in the sentence. Next, she uses a hyperbole. She writes that she's heartbroken, that the mountain of evidence was not enough. And then notice what she doesn't say. She doesn't say it was not enough to convince the jury. No, she says was not enough to stand up to the disproportionate power, influence, and sway of her ex-husband. The perspective is clear. She makes it sound like she's the weaker of the two for self-interest. This mirrors her legal team's strategy right from the beginning, to portray Heard as small next to Deb.
Let me introduce you to Amber, the lesser known person here, and I know when we were doing the voir dire, none of you had even watched as much as 3 of her movies, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Amber. They grew up very poor. Amber has a sister, Whitney, who's 16 months younger than her. Her father taught her she couldn't show fear, she couldn't show pain, and she couldn't show emotion.
"I have a right as an American."
It's significant for you to know that so you can understand how Amber could have remained in this relationship with Mr. Depp.
When attorneys portray their client as the underdog, it's a sympathy strategy designed to get the jury members to identify themselves with their client. The reason why we can be sure it's a sympathy strategy is because it has nothing to do with the case, nothing to do with evidence. And Deb obviously didn't buy her narrative as being small and weak.
Now, you're a lot bigger than Amber, correct? Physically?
I wouldn't say that.
Okay. Would you agree with me that the standards of a Southern gentleman were not in your mind in this particular moment, were they?
Heard makes it about Deb's power, influence, and sway. Implicitly, she actually says that the jury was starstruck and wasn't considering the mountain of evidence that she mentions but doesn't specify. She makes it sound like it was all about Deb's persona and not the evidence that his legal team presented, which is a kind of wishful thinking that's a lot easier for her to cope with. It's a lot easier to admit defeat to status than evidence. She writes that she's heartbroken about not being able to stand up to Deb, but in conclusion, what she actually sounds heartbroken about is that the jury and people at large didn't believe her. Next, she initiates association. Association is when a speaker or writer doesn't want to be alone in thinking or feeling a certain thing. Heard's form of association is an attempt to make women empathize with her, as if she's speaking on behalf of a group. Because she writes that she's even more disappointed with what this verdict means for other women. In theory, this makes her sound caring and even self-effacing in her fight for a bigger cause. However, the idea that she's caring and even self-effacing is contradicted by her belittling and selfish behavior on the tape recordings, along with her inauthentic testimonies.
But you're fine. I did not hurt you. I did not punch you. I was hitting you. I did start a physical fight.
Yeah, you did.
You did. So you did the right thing, the big thing. You know what? You're admirable. You're a baby.
I'll get back to the testimonies in a moment. Also, the reverse of what she's saying seems to be the case. She's the one who's made it harder for real victims to come forward. She has damaged the group that she claims to speak on behalf of. Thus, her statement is damage control. She blames the verdict for all of this before people blame her. The next short sentence, "it is a setback," is used to get the audience to focus on the noun, setback. She writes that the verdict sets back the clock to a time when a woman who spoke up and spoke out could be publicly shamed. Notice the perspective again. She's the everyday woman, speaking up to a more powerful person. With this word choice, she invites other everyday people to sympathize with her struggle. This speaks to the empowerment discourse that her legal team tried to convince the jury of, that Hurt came from humble beginnings, worked hard, achieved success, and is now brave enough to let her voice be heard.
I worked any job that I could from the time I was really young. I grew up quite working class, and I took any job that I could. I worked at my father's construction company, sometimes, just administrative stuff. I mean, it was a small company. I worked at a modeling agency that was also, offered photography classes, makeup classes, hair.
This is the narrative she still chooses to go with. However, her claim to be working class is questionable. This is likely the reason why she modifies it with quite. Also, she herself has taken every opportunity to shame Depp for his weaknesses.
And the plan was he would obviously abstain from alcohol completely and all other drugs like weed and coke. They put Johnny on a bunch of new medications, which they shared with me. And at the time I was staying in Boston with him, having wrapped my movie, and he would, in mid-sentence, mid-word, fall asleep. He was just bawling. It was taking about double the amount that he told them was his normal.
And the main strategy of her legal team has been ad hominems against Depp because they didn't have evidence to prove Hurt's allegations. So her claiming that this case is about a woman getting shamed isn't only misleading and deceptive, but also evidently untrue. It's easy to see Hurt's agenda, easy to see that she's trying to get her group riled up and forget the essence of the case, that this isn't about men or women, but about false accusations. Next, she details her issue with the jury's decision, which she hinted at earlier. She knows that she can't flat out say that the jury was wrong, so she makes it sound like they were manipulated too. Just like she previously implied that Depp's power and influence were used for manipulation. She writes that she believes, a stronger verb than think, believes that Johnny's attorneys succeeded in getting the jury to overlook the key issue of freedom of speech and ignore evidence that was so conclusive that we, as she writes, won in the UK. The pronoun we represents a collective and is once again association. With the verb overlook, she's careful not to impute ill intentions to the jury, but the verb ignore is more daring. And with the UK comparison, she more than implies that the jury didn't do a good and unbiased job. However, Hurt ignores a few facts also. This trial isn't comparable to the one in the UK. The charge and circumstances are different, and a lot more evidence was presented in the US trial, implying that the jury ignored evidence is a serious matter. But she covers herself by making Depp's attorneys the grammatical subject. With this, it's the attorneys that got them to ignore evidence. Hurt's careful not to defame the jury members also. One defamation trial is probably enough for a while. She tries to put the jury in the same underdog position as she will have people believe she's in. Next, she reliably writes that she's sad to have lost the case. This sounds like a rare moment of realization. However, she then proceeds with the conjunction but, which places emphasis on the following sentence and minimizes the previous. She writes, "But I am sadder still that I seem to have lost a right I thought I had as an American, to speak freely and openly." She takes every opportunity to associate with other people and highlight this association with the syntax of her sentences. Apparently, she's taken one for the team that isn't there though. She makes it sound like she's fighting for the very American identity, which shows her strong sense of self-importance. At no point does she consider the fact that this isn't a matter of freedom of speech, but of false accusations. She doesn't show any real understanding of how laws also apply to her, most likely because she struggles with or is incapable of introspection. The American identity was also one of her talking points in her second testimony, where she gave a performance that the jury clearly didn't fall for.
So to answer your question, Ben, I was able to turn the things that I've lived through, my pain, my life experiences, into work, into action, into providing a voice for other people. I want Johnny to leave me alone. I just want him to leave me alone. I have the right to tell my story. I have the right to say what happened to me. I have the right to my voice and my name. I have a right as an American.
It's ironic to see Heard accuse Depp's attorneys of getting the jury to do anything, when one of the primary techniques of her own attorneys was to get the jury to think bad about Depp, even though what they said wasn't related to Heard's criminal charges against him. Also, in their closing statement, Heard's attorneys tried to influence and change the jury members' way of thinking. In the following, notice how they tried to convince the jury into thinking that this is a simple matter. They're emphasizing how simple the case is, exactly because the reverse is true. The case is complex. Thus, their attempt to instruct the jury is a last resort.
This is one of the jury instructions that you'll get. And I've been so looking forward to being able to actually explain to you, as the judge read all the instructions to you this morning, and I know it was a lot, but we've been looking forward to being able to explain to you what you're here to decide. Because I imagine for some of the case, it's been kind of unclear. What are you being asked to decide? These are the things that you have to find, and you have to answer yes. As Mr. Chu said, you have to answer yes to all of them in order to find in favor of Mr. Depp. It is Mr. Depp's burden to prove each and every one of these elements. If he cannot, Ms. Heard wins. If he cannot prove each and every one of these elements under the burden of proof that's applicable, Ms. Heard wins. This isn't a hit piece on Johnny Depp. And you can end here. You can end there by saying the statements that she wrote were not false and the First Amendment protects them. Here we are. And you can decide this case without ever wading into any of the allegations, the facts, the evidence that you've heard. So if that's where you want to make your decision, that's where the road ends for Mr. Depp.
This isn't to blame Heard's legal team, because the problem's not them. The problem lies with their client. It's impossible to win with a client who won't admit to any wrongdoings and who clearly dramatizes and exaggerates events.
He has the window down, he's smoking. It wasn't all the way down, but he's constantly smoking, and at some point he starts howling out of the window and then grabs two small dogs. Well, one was Johnny's dog and one was my dog, but he grabs, if I remember correctly, Boo, his dog, slightly chunkier teacup Yorkie, and he grabs this teacup Yorkie and holds Boo out of the window of the moving car. And he's howling like an animal. And everyone in the car, I'll never forget it, everyone just froze. No one did anything. And I too was torn as to what I should do, because I didn't want to do anything to cause him to react, drop the dog. It was just this eerie moment where he's howling. Johnny found out that I had this meeting scheduled and was furious at me. That was a big problem for Johnny. Combined with the drinking, it was not very long before I was being accused of full-on having this other plan to sleep with the writer.
Finally, it's my opinion that Heard's strategy of constantly looking at the jury speaks volumes about her lack of self-awareness, how she wants to be perceived versus how she's actually perceived. For jury members, this feels like manipulation and hence being talked down to. The fact that she maintained the strategy suggests that she's more or less bad at reading people and anticipating how they react. And as I've said before, strategies mean nothing without sincerity. Let me know what you think about the trial in the comments below. See you in the next video.